Welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, we return to the autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini. Our goldsmith adventurer has fallen back into the hands of the Pope, and, unbeknown to his friends, is kept in terrible constraint in a deep dungeon with a broken leg. He turns to religion, and because Benvenuto Cellini is such an awesome man, he is comforted by his personal guardian angel, and then the injury to his leg is ministered, in his dreams at least, by the heavenly hosts. After he gets out of prison, this does not change Cellini's lifestyle, so much as affirm to him that the things he's doing, which other people may consider wrong, can't possibly be that big of a deal. Thanks to the LibriVox production team, the reader this time is Christine Beccare.
The Castellan, meanwhile, ill and afflicted as he was, had himself transported to my prison, and exclaimed, "You see that I have recaptured you." "Yes," said I, "but you see that I escaped, as I told you I would. And if I had not been sold by a Venetian cardinal, under papal guarantee, for the price of a bishopric, the Pope a Roman and a Farnese, and both of them have scratched with impious hands the face of the most sacred laws, you would not have recovered me. But now that they have opened this vile way of dealing, do you the worst you can in your turn. I care for nothing in the world." The wretched man began shouting at the top of his voice, "Ah, woe is me, woe is me! It is all the same to this fellow, whether he lives or dies, and behold, he is more fiery than when he was in health. Put him down there below the garden, and do not speak to me of him again, for he is the destined cause of my death." So I was taken into a gloomy dungeon below the level of a garden, which swam with water, and was full of big spiders and many venomous worms. They flung me a wretched mattress of coarse hemp, gave me no supper, and locked 4 doors upon me. In that condition I abode until the 19th hour of the following day. Then I received food, and I requested my jailers to give me some of my books to read. None of them spoke a word, but they referred my prayer to the unfortunate Castellan, who had made inquiries concerning what I said. Next morning they brought me an Italian Bible, which belonged to me, and a copy of the Chronicles of Giovanni Villani. When I asked for certain other of my books, I was told that I could have no more, and that I had got too many already. Thus then I continued to exist in misery upon that rotten mattress, which in 3 days soaked up water like a sponge. I could hardly stir because of my broken leg, and when I had to get out of bed to obey a call of nature, I crawled on all fours with extreme distress, in order not to foul the place I slept in. For 1 hour and a half each day I got a little glimmering of light, which penetrated that unhappy cavern through a very narrow aperture. Only for so short a space of time could I read. The rest of the day and night I abode in darkness, enduring my lot, nor ever without meditations upon God and on our human frailty. I thought it certain that a few more days would put an end of my unlucky life in that sad place and in that miserable manner. Nevertheless, as well as I was able, I comforted my soul by calling to mind how much more painful it would have been, on passing from this life, to have suffered that unimaginable horror of the hangman's knife. Now, being as I was, I should depart with the uneasiness of sleepiness, which robbed death of half its former terrors. Little by little I felt my vital forces waning, until at last my vigorous temperament had become adapted to that purgatory. When I felt it quite acclimatized, I resolved to put up with all those indescribable discomforts so long as it held out. Chapter 118. I began the Bible from the commencement, reading and reflecting on it so devoutly, and finding in it such deep treasures of delight, that if I had been able, I should have done naught else but study it. However, light was wanting, and the thought of all my troubles kept recurring and gnawing at me in the darkness, until I often made my mind up to put an end somehow to my own life. They did not allow me a knife, however, and so it was no easy matter to commit suicide. Once, notwithstanding, I took and propped a wooden pole I found there, in position like a trap. I meant to make it topple over on my head, and it would certainly have dashed my brains out. But when I had arranged the whole machine, and was approaching to put it in motion, just at the moment of my setting my hand to it, I was seized by an invisible power, and flung 4 cubits from the spot, in such a terror that I lay half dead. Like that I remained from dawn until the 19th hour, when they brought me food. The jailers must have visited my cell several times without my taking notice of them, for when at last I heard them, Captain Sandrino Monaldi had entered, and I heard him saying: "Ah, unhappy man! Behold the end to which so rare a genius has come." Roused by these words, I opened my eyes, and caught sight of priests, with long gowns on their backs, who were saying: "Oh, you told us he was dead." Bozza replied: "Dead I found him, and therefore I told you so." Then they lifted me from where I lay, and after shaking up the mattress, which was now as soppy as a dish of macaroni, they flung it outside the dungeon. The castellan, when these things were reported to him, sent me another mattress. Thereafter, when I searched my memory to find what could have diverted me from that design of suicide, I came to the conclusion that it must have been some power divine and my good guardian angel. Chapter 119. During the following night there appeared to me in dreams a marvellous being, in the form of the most lovely youth, who cried, as though he wanted to reprove me: "Knowest thou who lent thee that body, which thou wouldst have spoiled before its time?" I seemed to answer that I recognized all things pertaining to me as gifts from the God of nature. "So then," he said, "thou hast contempt for his handiwork, through this thy will to spoil it. Commit thyself unto his guidance, and lose not hope in his great goodness." Much more he added, in words of marvellous efficacy, and thousandth part of which I cannot now remember. I began to consider that the angel of my vision spoke the truth, so I cast my eyes around the prison, and saw some scraps of rotten brick, with the fragments of which, rubbing one against the other, I composed a paste. Then, creeping on all fours, as I was compelled to go, I crawled up to an angle of my dungeon door, and gnawed a splinter from it with my teeth. Having achieved this feat, I waited till the light came on my prison. That was from the hour of 20½ to 21½. When it arrived, I began to write, the best I could, on some blank pages in my Bible, and rebuked the regents of my intellectual self for being too impatient to endure this life. They replied to my body with excuses drawn from all that they had suffered, and the body gave them hope of better fortune. To this effect, then, by way of dialogue, I wrote as follows: Benvenuto in the body. Afflicted regents of my soul, ah cruel ye, have ye such hate of life? The spirits of his soul. If heaven against you roll, who stands for us, who saves us in the strife? Let us, oh, let us go toward better life. Benvenuto. Nay, go not yet awhile. Ye shall be happier and lighter far. Heaven gives this hope than ye were ever yet. The spirits. We will remain some little while, if only by great God you promised are, such grace that no worse woes on us be set. After this I recovered strength, and when I had heartened up myself, I continued reading in the Bible, and my eyes became so used to that darkness that I could now read for 3 hours instead of the bare hour and a half I was able to employ before. With profound astonishment I dwelt upon the force of God's Spirit in those men of great simplicity, who believed so fervently that He would bring all their heart's desire to pass. I then proceeded to reckon in my own case, too, on God's assistance, both because of His divine power and mercy, and also because of my own innocence, and at all hours, sometimes in prayer and sometimes in communion with God, I abode in those high thoughts of Him. There flowed into my soul so powerful a delight from these reflections upon God, that I took no further thought for all the anguish I had suffered, but rather spent the day in singing psalms and divers other compositions on the theme of His divinity. I was greatly troubled, however, by one particular annoyance. My nails had grown so long that I could not touch my body without wounding it. I could not dress myself but what they turned inside or out, to my great torment. Moreover, my teeth began to perish in my mouth. I became aware of this, because the dead teeth being pushed on by the living ones, my gums were gradually perforated, and the points of the roots pierced through the tops of their cases. When I was aware of this, I used to pull one out, as though it were a weapon from a scabbard, without any pain or loss of blood. Very many of them did I lose in this way. Nevertheless, I accommodated myself to these new troubles also. At times I sang, at times I prayed, and at times I wrote by means of the paste of brick dust I have described above. At this time I began composing a Capitolo in praise of my prison, relating in it all the accidents which had befallen me. This poem I meant to insert in its proper place. Note. Capitolo is the technical name for a copy of verses in terza rima on a chosen theme. Poems of this kind, mostly burlesque or satirical, were very popular in Cellini's age. They used to be written on trifling or obscene subjects in a mock heroic style. Barony stamped the character of high art upon the species, which had long been in use among the unlettered vulgar. End of the note. Chapter 120. The good Castellan used frequently to send messengers to find out secretly what I was doing. So it happened on the last day of July that I was rejoicing greatly by myself alone, while I bethought me of the festival they keep in Rome upon the 1st of August, and I was saying to myself, in former years I kept the feast among the pleasures and the frailties of the world. This year I shall keep it in communion with God. Oh, how far more happy am I thus than I was then! The persons who heard me speak these words reported them to the Castellan. He was greatly annoyed, and exclaimed, Ah, God! That fellow lives and triumphs in his infinite distress, while I lack all things in the midst of comfort, and am dying only on account of him. Go quickly and fling him into that deepest of the subterranean dungeons, where the preacher Foiano was starved to death. Perhaps when he finds himself in such ill plight, he will begin to droop his crest. Captain Sandrino Monaldi came at once into my prison with about 20 of the Castellan's servants. They found me on my knees, and I did not turn at their approach, but went on paying my orisons before a God the Father surrounded with angels, and a Christ arising victorious from the grave, which I had sketched upon the wall with a little piece of charcoal I had found covered up with earth. This was after I had lain 4 months upon my back in bed with my leg broken, and had so often dreamed that angels came and ministered to me, that at the end of those 4 months the limb became as sound as though it never had been fractured. So then these fellows entered, all in armour, as fearful of me as though I were a poison breathing dragon. The captain spoke as follows. You must be aware that there are many of us here, and our entrance has made a tumult in this place, yet you do not turn round." When I heard these words, I was well able to conceive what greater harm might happen to me; but being used and hardened to misfortune, I said to them: "Unto this God who supports me, to him in heaven I have turned my soul, my contemplation, and all my vital spirits. To you I have turned precisely what belongs to you. What there is of good in me you are not worthy to behold, nor can you touch it. Do then to that which is under your control all the evil you are able." The captain, in some alarm, and not knowing what I might be on the point of doing, said to four of his tallest fellows: "Put all your arms aside." When they had done so, he added: "Now upon the instant leap on him and secure him well. Do you think he is the devil, that so many of us should be afraid of him? Hold him tight now, that he may not escape you." Seized by them with force and roughly handled, and anticipating something far worse than what afterwards happened, I lifted my eyes to Christ and said: "O just God, thou paidst all our debts upon that high raised cross of thine; wherefore, then, must my innocents be made to pay the debts of whom I do not even know? Nevertheless, thy will be done." Meanwhile the men were carrying me away with a great lighted torch, and I thought that they were about to throw me down the oubliette of Sammabo. This was the name given to a fearful place, which had swallowed many men alive; for when they are cast into it, they fall to the bottom of a deep pit in the foundation of the castle. This did not, however, happen to me; wherefore I thought that I was made a very good bargain when they placed me in that hideous dungeon I have spoken of, where Fra Foiano died of hunger, and left me there without doing me further injury. When I was alone, I began to sing a De profundis clamavi, and Miserere, and In te Domine speravi. During the whole of that first day of August I kept festival with God, my heart rejoicing ever in the strength of hope and faith. On the second day they drew me from that hole, and took me back again to the prison where I had drawn those representations of God. On arriving there, the sight of them filled me with such sweetness and such gladness that I wept abundantly. On every day that followed, the castellan sent to know what I was doing and saying. The Pope, who had heard the whole history, and I must add that the doctors had already given the castellan over, spoke as follows: "Before my castellan dies, I will let him put that Benvenuto to death in any way he likes, for he is the cause of his death, and so the good man shall not die unrevenged." On hearing these words from the mouth of Duke Pier Luigi, the castellan replied: "So, then, the Pope has given me Benvenuto, and wishes me to take my vengeance on him. Dismiss the matter from your mind, and leave me to act." If the heart of the Pope was ill disposed against me, that of the castellan was now at the commencement savage and cruel in extreme. At this juncture, the invisible being who had diverted me from my intention of suicide came to me, being still invisible, but with a clear voice, and shook me and made me rise, and said to me: "Ah me, my Benvenuto, quick, quick, betake thyself to God with thy accustomed prayers, and cry out loudly, loudly." In a sudden consternation I fell upon my knees, and recited several of my prayers in a loud voice. After this I said, Qui habitat in adjutorio. Then I communed a space with God, and in an instant the same clear and open voice said to me: "Go to rest, and have no further fear." The meaning of this was, that the castellan, after giving the most cruel orders for my death, suddenly countermanded them, and said: "Is not this Benvenuto the man whom I have so warmly defended, whom I know of a surety to be innocent, and who has been so greatly wronged? Oh, how will God have mercy on me and my sins, if I do not pardon those who have done me the greatest injuries? Oh, why should I injure a man, both worthy and innocent, who has only done me services and honour? Go to, instead of killing him, I give him life and liberty, and in my will I'll have it written that none shall demand of him the heavy debt for his expenses here, which he would elsewise have to pay. This the Pope heard, and took it very ill indeed. Chapter 121. I meanwhile continued to pray as usual, and to write my Capitolo, and every night I was visited with the gladdest and most pleasant dreams that could be possibly imagined. It seemed to me while dreaming that I was always in the visible company of that being, whose voice and touch, while he was still invisible, I had so often felt. To him I made but one request, and this I urged most earnestly, namely, that he would bring me where I could behold the sun. I told him that this was my sole desire I had, and that if I could but see the sun once only, I should die contented. All the disagreeable circumstances of my prison had become, as it were, to me friendly and companionable. Not one of them gave me annoyance. Nevertheless, I ought to say that the castellan's parasites, who were waiting for him to hang me from the battlement whence I had made my escape, when they saw that he had changed his mind to the exact opposite of what he previously threatened, were unable to endure the disappointment. Accordingly, they kept continually trying to inspire me with the fear of imminent death by means of various terrifying hints. But as I have already said, I had become so well acquainted with troubles of this sort that I was incapable of fear, and nothing any longer could disturb me. Only I had that one great longing to behold the sphere of the sun, if only in a dream. Thus, then, while I spent many hours a day in a prayer with deep emotion of the spirit toward Christ, I used always to say: Ah, very Son of God, I pray thee by thy birth, by thy death upon the cross, and by thy glorious resurrection, that thou wilt deign to let me see the sun, if not otherwise, at least in dreams. But if thou wilt grant me to behold it with these mortal eyes of mine, I engage myself to come and visit thee at thy holy sepulchre. This vow and these my greatest prayers to God I made upon the 2nd of October in the year 1539. Upon the following morning, which was the 3rd of October, I woke at daybreak, perhaps an hour before the rising of the sun. Dragging myself from the miserable lair in which I lay, I put some clothes on, for it had begun to be cold. Then I prayed more devoutly than ever I had done in the past, fervently imploring Christ that he would at least grant me the favour of knowing by divine inspiration what sin I was so sorely expiating. And since his divine Majesty had not deemed me worthy of beholding the sun even in a dream, I besought him to let me know the cause of my punishment. Chapters 122 through 126 of the Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Volume 1. Translated by John Addington Symonds. Chapters 122 through 126. Chapter 122. I had barely uttered these words when the invisible being, like a whirlwind, caught me up and bore me away into a large room, where he made himself visible to my eyes in human form, appearing like a young man whose beard is just growing, with a face of indescribable beauty, but austere, not wanton. He bade me look around the room and said: The crowd of men thou seest in this place are all those who up to this day have been born and afterwards have died upon the earth. Thereupon I asked him why he brought me hither, and he answered, Come with me, and thou shalt soon behold. In my hand I had a poniard, and upon my back a coat of mail, and so he led me through that vast hall, pointing out the people, who were walking by innumerable thousands up and down, this way and that. He led me onward, and went forth in front of me through a little low door into a place which looked like a narrow street, and when he drew me after him into the street, at the moment of leaving the hall, behold, I was disarmed and clothed in a white shirt, with nothing on my head, and I was walking on the right hand of my companion. Finding myself in this condition, I was seized with wonder, because I did not recognize the street, and when I lifted my eyes, I discerned that the splendour of the sun was striking on a wall, as it were a house front, just above my head. Then I said, O my friend, what must I do in order to be able to ascend so high that I may gaze upon the sphere of the sun himself? He pointed out some huge stairs which were on my right hand, and said to me, Go up thither by thyself. Quitting his side, I ascended the stairs backwards, and gradually began to come within the region of the sunlight. Then I hastened my steps and went on, always walking backwards as I have described, until I discovered the whole sphere of the sun. The strength of his rays, as is their wont, first made me close my eyes, but becoming aware of my misdoing, I opened them wide, and gazing steadfastly at the sun, exclaimed, O my son, for whom I have passionately yearned! Albeit your rays may blind me, I do not wish to look on anything again but this. So I stayed awhile, with my eyes fixed steadily on him, and after a brief space I beheld in one moment the whole might of those great burning rays fling themselves upon the left side of the sun, so that the orb remained quite clear without its rays, and I was able to contemplate it with vast delight. It seemed to me something marvellous that the rays should be removed in that manner. Then I reflected what a divine grace it was which God had granted me that morning, and cried aloud, O wonderful thy power! O glorious thy virtue! How far greater is the grace which thou art granting me than that which I expected! The sun without his rays appeared to me to be a bath of the purest molten gold, neither more nor less. While I stood contemplating this wondrous thing, I noticed that the middle of the sphere began to swell, and the swollen surface grew, and suddenly a Christ, upon the cross, formed itself out of the same substance as the sun. He bore the aspect of divine benignity with such fair grace that the mind of man could not conceive the thousandth part of it. And while I gazed in ecstasy, I shouted, A miracle, O God, O clemency divine, O immeasurable goodness! What is it thou hast deigned this day to show me? While I was gazing and exclaiming thus, the Christ moved toward that part where his rays were settled, and the middle of the sun once more bulged out as it had done before. The boss expanded, and suddenly transformed itself into the shape of a most beautiful Madonna, who appeared to be sitting enthroned on high, holding her child in her arms, with an attitude of the greatest charm and a smile upon her face. On each side of her was an angel, whose beauty far surpasses men's imagination. I also saw within the rondure of the sun, upon the right hand, a figure robed like a priest. This turned its back to me, and kept its face directed to the Madonna and the Christ. All these things I beheld, actual, clear, and vivid, and kept returning thanks to the glory of God as loud as I was able. The marvellous apparition remained before me little more than half a quarter of an hour, then it dissolved, and I was carried back to my dark lair. I began at once to shout aloud, The virtue of God has deigned to show me all his glory. the which perchance no mortal eye has ever seen before. Therefore I know surely that I am free and fortunate, and in the grace of God. But you miscreants shall be miscreants still, accursed, and in the wrath of God. Mark this, for I am certain of it, that on the day of All Saints, the day upon which I was born in 1500, on the 1st of November, at 4 hours after nightfall, on that day which is coming you will be forced to lead me from this gloomy dungeon. Less than this you will not be able to do, because I have seen it with these eyes of mine, and in that throne of God. The priest who kept his face turned to God and his back to me, that priest was Saint Peter, pleading my cause, for the shame he felt that such foul wrongs should be done to Christians in his own house. You may go and tell it to whom you like, for none on earth has the power to do me harm henceforward, and tell that Lord who keeps me here, that if he will give me wax or paper, and the means of portraying this glory of God, which was revealed to me, most assuredly shall I convince him of that which now perhaps he holds in doubt. Chapter 123. The physicians gave the castellan no hope of his recovery, yet he remained with the clear intellect, and the humours which used to afflict him every year had passed away. He devoted himself entirely to the care of his soul, and his conscience seemed to smite him, because he felt that I had suffered and was suffering a grievous wrong. The Pope received information from him of the extraordinary things which I related, in answer to which his Holiness sent word, as one who had no faith either in God or aught beside, that I was mad, and that he must do his best to mend his health. When the castellan received this message, he sent to cheer me up, and furnished me with writing materials and wax, and certain little wooden instruments employed in working wax, adding many words of courtesy, which were reported by one of his servants, who bore me good will. This man was totally the opposite of that rascally gang who had wished to see me hanged. I took the paper and the wax, and began to work, and while I was working I wrote the following sonnet, addressed to the castellan: If I, my lord, could show to you the truth of that eternal light to me by heaven, in this low life revealed you sure had given more heed to mine than to a monarch's sooth. Ah, could the pastor of Christ's flock in ruth believe how God this soul with sight hath shriven of glory, unto which no wight hath striven, ere he escaped earth's cave of care and couth, the gates of justice holy and austere would roll asunder, and rude impious rage fall chained with shrieks that should assail the skies. Had I but light, ah me, my art should rear a monument of heaven's high equipage, nor should my misery bear so grim a guise. On the following day, when the servant of the castellan, who was my friend, brought me my food, I gave him this sonnet, copied out in writing. Without informing the other ill-disposed servants, who were my enemies, he handed it to the castellan. At that time this worthy man would gladly have granted me my liberty, because he fancied that the great wrong done to me was the main cause of his death. He took the sonnet, and having read it more than once, exclaimed, These are neither the words nor the thoughts of a madman, but rather of a sound and worthy fellow. Without delay he ordered his secretary to take it to the Pope, and place it in his own hands, adding a request for my deliverance. While the secretary was on his way with my sonnet to the Pope, the castellan sent me lights for day and night, together with all the conveniences one could wish for in that place. The result of this was that I began to recover from my physical depression, which had reached a very serious degree. The Pope read the sonnet several times. Then he sent word to the castellan that he meant presently to do what would be pleasing to him. Certainly the Pope had no unwillingness to release me then, but Signor Pier Luigi, his son, as it were in the Pope's despite, kept me there by force. The death of the castellan was drawing near, and while I was engaged in drawing and modelling that miracle which I had seen, upon the morning of All Saints' Day he sent his nephew, Piero Ugolini, to show me certain jewels. No sooner had I set eyes on them than I exclaimed, "This is the countersign of my deliverance." Then the young man, who was not a person of much intelligence, began to say: "Never think of that, Benvenuto." I replied: "Take your gems away, for I am so treated here that I have no light to see by except what this murky cavern gives, and that is not enough to test the quality of precious stones. But as regards my deliverance from this dungeon, the day will not end before you come to fetch me out. It shall and must be so, and you will not be able to prevent it." The man departed and had me locked in, but after he had remained away 2 hours by the clock, he returned without armed men, bringing only a couple of lads to assist my movements. So after this fashion he conducted me to the spacious rooms which I had previously occupied, that is to say, in 1538, where I obtained all the conveniences I asked for.
Your saga may vary.